Heightened security measures are in place across the country ahead of President-elect Biden's inauguration this Wednesday. A U.S. government official says that the greatest threat to the inauguration is domestic violent extremists. In the nation's capital, businesses are boarding up, the National Mall is shut down, and the Pentagon has called in 25,000 troops. This map of road closures in D.C. gives you an idea of how tight security is around the Capitol and White House. The green zones indicate where traffic is restricted to residents or businesses, and the red zones are for authorized vehicles only. For previous inaugurations, hundreds of thousands of people would usually watch from the National Mall. Not so this time. The FBI is also warning of possible armed protests at all 50 state capitals. This comes as nearly 300 suspects have been identified in connection with the assault on the Capitol. CBS News congressional correspondent Nikole Killion is at the White House with more on the final weekend of Trump's presidency.
Washington drawing comparisons to a war zone, walled off with barbed wire, barricades, and blockades of National Guard troops at the ready, as disturbing new details emerge about the January 6th insurrection. When rioters stormed the Capitol,
protesters are in the building.
Vice President Mike Pence waited nearly 14 minutes in the Senate chamber after the initial security breach, giving the angry intruders time to get closer to his location, some calling him a traitor and chanting for him to be hanged. The rioters were less than 100 feet from where the vice president and his family were hiding before the Secret Service evacuated them to safety. In court filings late this week, investigators say Jacob Chansley, dubbed the QAnon shaman, espoused identifying and hanging leaders he viewed as traitors within the United States government, and that Chansley left a note for Mr. Pence on the Senate dais. It's only a matter of time. Justice is coming. On Friday, D.C.'s acting U.S. Attorney Michael Sherwin said there is no direct evidence teams of rioters were looking to capture or kill during the assault, but investigations are ongoing.
That is a Tier 1 top priority for both the U.S. Attorney's Office and our federal law enforcement partners to see, again, whether there was this overarching command and control and whether there were these organized teams that were organized to breach the Capitol and then perhaps try to accomplish some type of a mission inside the Capitol.
The Capitol Police also opened a probe into whether some members of Congress helped the protesters plan their assault. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi named retired Lieutenant General Russell Honore, who led the military response to Hurricane Katrina, to conduct an immediate review.
There is strong interest in the Congress in a 9/11 type commission, an outside commission, to conduct that after-action review. In the meantime, I'm very grateful to General Honore.
The Washington Post reports that an internal Capitol Police intelligence report warned of a possible violent scenario where Congress itself could be targeted by some of the president's supporters. That red flag went out 3 days before the riot and was not widely shared. Lana?
Nikole, thank you. And joining me now from our D.C. bureau is CBS senior investigative correspondent Catherine Herridge. Catherine, what is the latest intelligence about threats to the inauguration, and where does that security stand right now?
Well, Lana, this is called an NSSE, or a National Special Security Event. This is the highest security designation that any event can have here in the United States, and security is led by the Secret Service. I've been covering these since 2001, and what makes this different is the way in which the security footprint has been expanded around the Capitol and the number of days that security perimeter is in place. And of course, as you see here, the very visible military security presence. Up to 25,000 National Guard will be here in Washington. And the objective of government officials is to create a deterrent, to harden this target in order to give a disincentive to those who might want to commit violence on Wednesday.
You know, Catherine, seeing those images, it's so striking, particularly for anybody who's spent any time in D.C., seeing those National Guard troops, seeing those barricades. And it's interesting, too, given that what we have learned about requests for the National Guard in advance of the assault on the Capitol, and how several people denied those requests because they were worried about those optics. How much is this warranted now as a deterrent versus an overreaction to the security failures that we saw previously?
Well, the first point I would say is that based on a discussion I had earlier today with a U.S. government official, when you look at these intelligence bulletins from FBI, DHS, other government agencies over the last 10 days, there's a single conclusion, which is that the greatest threat to the inauguration doesn't come from foreign terrorist organizations, but rather from domestic violent extremists. They use this law enforcement acronym, DVEs. And what these assessments point to is conditions that have created this environment for violence. For example, the deep political divisions in this country and questions in some people's minds about the legitimacy of the presidential election. Then there are racial overlays as well, and then the ripple effect of the COVID-19 deaths and lockdowns. And the intelligence bulletins assess that this has created the perfect environment for individuals who in the past might have sat on the sidelines and not acted out, but it's allowed them, almost like fuel onto a fire, allow them to cross that threshold to violence and act out. And I think what's most important is that these intelligence assessments see the threat from domestic violent extremists, or DVEs, really extending well beyond January 20th. And just a second point, if I could. I want to say, based on my experience, that we are likely to see sort of a flood of intelligence bulletins in the next few days. Some of that, I think, may be in part a response to that lead-up period before January 6th, where there has been, rightly criticism about the lack of warning, perhaps, to the individuals and entities that really were in the best place to act upon that information.
You know, all of that's so interesting, Catherine, these domestic violent extremists and the intelligence that you're telling us about. I'm wondering what the intelligence also says about potential spillover to violence in state capitals. As you know, so much of Washington, D.C. has been shut down. How much is this going to make those DVEs go to target government where they are rather than trying to come to the nation's capital?
Well, I recently obtained this New York Police Department intelligence product, and it directly addresses that issue. It talks about social media postings, other intelligence that points to the fact that individuals may choose to act out rather than in Washington, D.C., but focus their efforts on state capitals. And you've raised a very important point, which is certainly in the forefront of the minds of officials here in Washington. There's kind of a term in law enforcement. It's called bumper shot terrorism or bumper shot violence. And let me break that down for you. So you have a hardened target in Washington, D.C. What it means is that violent actors decide against coming to Washington, and they look for softer targets outside that perimeter. Could be Washington or could be state capitals. And you see some, this is a video out of Georgia, are already ramping up for that possibility.
To shift gears a little bit, Catherine, because people are still really concerned about the insurrection at the Capitol. And I'm wondering if you can tell us anything more about the investigations into that attack, specifically some of those allegations that there were people on the inside who gave some advanced support to those rioters. What are we learning?
Well, I think there are three things that are really standing out to me right now. One is these pipe bombs. What I've learned through my reporting is that these pipe bombs that were planted at the Republican National Committee headquarters and Democratic National Committee headquarters, 1245 and 115, these were viable explosive devices. They used kitchen timers, and investigators are trying to work out whether the timers were set incorrectly or there may have been a connective issue with the batteries, which is why those pipe bombs did not go off. The second thing that continues to have my attention is some of the video that stands out, which clearly shows individuals who know each other and to some maybe limited extent have practiced together. I had some video reviewed by a former ATF, FBI official, and then also some individuals outside. I'm not going to go into all of those details. But they all said that it's the highest priority to identify any individual who used a military-style or law enforcement tactic in their efforts to gain entry to the Capitol. So, for example, the use of hand signals or making kind of a human chain as they went up the stairs, and they can use non-visual, non-audio cues in order to communicate with each other. Final point.
Right.
I've covered Capitol Hill for 15 years. This is one of the most complex campuses to navigate. And I'm still struck with the speed at which some of these groups were able to get to their mission objectives or their targets in this case, because it's a complicated building, areas were being blocked off, but they still managed to get to their objective in a timely fashion.
Yeah, Representative Clyburn told me that he is convinced that they had support because that mob was able to target not his public-facing office, but the one in which he actually worked. And he said that unless you have inside knowledge, there's just no way that that could have happened, is his assessment. Catherine, as we are fighting this war within our own country, and I'm saying that as an ideological war, obviously a metaphorical war. How much are you concerned? Because you usually are covering terrorist plots and things like that, I think, when we're talking about what's happening in the world and threats to this country. How concerned are you about how foreign adversaries might be trying to capitalize on this moment in our country?
Well, I spoke with a government official this morning about the likelihood that Iran, China, and Russia, these influence actors, would try and capitalize and, in effect, hijack these narratives to further their own policy objectives with a new administration. And the official said that they thought that that was highly likely given their historical behaviors. The reason that matters is that you have to understand that these adversaries see very clearly that you don't sort of defeat, the expression is you don't defeat America from the outside, you have to defeat it from the inside, and you have to exploit the divisions, or what law enforcement likes to call exploiting the seams, in order to achieve your objectives. And that's what concerns me most in the environment that we're in, for obvious reasons.
Certainly, and we have seen intelligence reports that that foreign governments have supported a lot of these conspiracy theories and outright lies that have populated social media and divided Americans who are trying to sort all of this out. All right, Catherine, thank you so much for talking this through with us.